Most crimes disappear with time. This one survived in ink. It was buried in a courthouse basement, written in neat columns by men who never imagined anyone would read their words 2 centuries later. They recorded cotton bales, land deeds, expenses, profits and births with the same cold care. What they never recorded was suffering. But the pattern was there, hiding in plain sight. 5 plantations, 5 births, 5 sales, 7 years, all tied to one woman. Her name was Martha. When the Richmond County Preservation Society began digitizing old courthouse ledgers in 2009, they expected dryland records and faded tax disputes. An intern named Rebecca Chen was assigned to plantation transfer logs from the 1840s. She almost missed it. One name repeated too often. Always followed by the same phrase. With newborn child. Rebecca checked the dates again. Then the locations. Then she sat back in her chair, uneasy. The math was too clean. Too precise. A coincidence would not repeat like this. Someone had been tracking something. Or someone. To understand what the ledgers truly revealed, you have to go back to the beginning. Not to a diary or a letter, because Martha was not allowed those things. Her life survives only in transactions and numbers. In receipts and property records. In the merciless arithmetic of human ownership. Martha arrived at Riverside Plantation on a humid Tuesday morning in April 1840. She was 19 years old. She had been purchased 3 days earlier at a Charleston auction for $800. That was a high price. It reflected her youth, her health and something far more dangerous. She could read and write. The bill of sale still exists. It lists her skills carefully. Reading, writing, arithmetic, needlework, cooking. In many southern states, teaching enslaved people to read was illegal. Literacy made Martha valuable and threatening at the same time. The auction took place in a brick warehouse near the harbor. The smell of salt water mixed with sweat and fear. Martha stood on a wooden platform while men examined her like livestock. They checked her teeth, her hands, her posture. One man asked her to read aloud from the Charleston Courier. She did, her voice steady, her eyes fixed on the page. She refused to look at the faces watching her. When the bidding reached $800, William Hargrove raised his hand one final time. Martha became his property. Riverside Plantation stretched across 1,200 acres along the Savannah River. The main house was a 3-story Georgian structure with white columns visible from the water. It was designed to be seen. To announce power. Behind it lay endless cotton fields. Nearer the house stood the working buildings. Kitchen house, laundry house, storehouses, stables, and a row of small cabins where the enslaved workers lived. William Hargrove had inherited Riverside in 1837, along with 63 enslaved people and a heavy amount of debt. At 32, he believed discipline and modern management would save the plantation. He kept detailed ledgers. Every bale of cotton, every expense, every profit. He also kept records of human beings. Names, ages, skills, births, deaths, purchases, sales. Martha's arrival was recorded with chilling simplicity. April 14, 1840. Martha, female, age 19, purchased Charleston auction, cost $800. Literate. Assigned main house. She was placed under the supervision of Eleanor Hargrove, William's wife. Eleanor was 30, thin, sharp-eyed and deeply religious. She ran the household with strict order and constant judgment. Silence during meals. Immediate obedience. Gratitude for what she called Christian charity. Martha's days began before sunrise. She walked from the quarters to the main house in the dark. She lit fires in bedrooms and parlors. Heated water. Cleaned rooms. Made beds so tightly Mrs. Hargrove inspected them with a ruler. Afternoons were laundry. Boiling water. Scrubbing cloth until her hands burned. Ironing with heavy irons heated on the stove. Evenings meant serving dinner, cleaning again, preparing the house for night. She rarely finished before 9. Sometimes later. Then she walked back to her cabin and collapsed onto her pallet, knowing the cycle would repeat before dawn. Martha learned quickly how to survive. Do not meet their eyes. Do not appear defiant. Speak only when spoken to. Anticipate needs. Become invisible. The other house servants noticed her caution. Slowly, they began to warn her. Dinah, the cook, told her which moods to avoid. Esther warned her when trouble was coming. Clara whispered which corners of the house were safest. 3 months later, everything changed. In July 1840, a new overseer arrived. His name was Dutch Carmichael. He was 35, red-haired, hard-eyed and known for increasing productivity. He moved into the overseer's cottage near the stables and immediately imposed stricter rules. Longer hours. Shorter breaks, faster picking, harsher punishment. Within days, he noticed Martha. At first it was watching. Standing nearby when she carried water. Appearing where she worked. Finding reasons to send her on errands that took her away from the main house. The other women saw it. They tried to protect her. Stay where people can see you. Do not go alone. But there was nowhere safe. An enslaved woman had no legal right to refuse a command from any white man. Everyone knew it. In early August, Carmichael cornered Martha in the laundry house. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows. The other workers had already left. The door closed behind him. What happened next was never written down. No ledger recorded it. No receipt marked it. No official ever asked. But a few months later, a new line would appear in William Hargrove's records. Written in the same neat hand as cotton totals and feed costs. Martha, with child. And that line would begin a pattern so dark and deliberate that it would take more than a century to notice. If you want to uncover what happened next and how those 5 plantations became one woman's prison, make sure you subscribe to the channel, share this story, and leave a comment telling us what state you are watching from. History remembers what people try to bury. Part 2. Some patterns are accidents. This one was designed. It moved quietly from plantation to plantation, written in ink so clean it almost looked respectable. But behind every line was a scream no one recorded and a choice no one allowed. By the time Martha understood the pattern, it was already too late. By October 1840, she knew she was pregnant. She told no one. She bound her stomach tightly with strips of cloth torn from old linens. Each morning she wrapped herself until it hurt to breathe, until her ribs ached, until her body felt like it was being crushed inward. Pain was safer than discovery. Pain was familiar. She continued her work as if nothing had changed. She scrubbed floors. She ironed dresses. She carried trays through silent dining rooms. She moved with the same quiet efficiency that had kept her alive since childhood. Inside her, fear and anger fought each other every hour. She knew what pregnancy meant on a plantation. She had watched other women swell and disappear. She had heard the whispers after dark about babies taken away. About children sold south. About women forced to return to work days after giving birth, their arms empty. She also knew the danger of carrying a child fathered by a white man. Those children were valuable, too valuable. By January 1841, the bindings could no longer hide her body. Mrs. Hargrove noticed during a fitting for new household uniforms. Her fingers froze mid-adjustment. Then they closed around Martha's arm with surprising strength. "You are with child," she said. It was not a question. Martha said nothing. There was nothing she could say that would save her. That evening, Mrs. Hargrove told her husband. William Hargrove listened in silence, his fingers steepled in front of him. Then he sent for Dutch Carmichael. The overseer arrived within minutes. The conversation lasted 17 minutes. No one knew what was said, but the house servants heard raised voices. The walls carried tension like heat. When Carmichael finally emerged, his face was red and tight with rage. He walked straight to his cottage and shut the door. 3 days later, he was gone. The ledger recorded it neatly. January 19, 1841. Terminated Dutch Carmichael, cause violation of household policy. Final wages paid, $47. The same day, Martha was removed from the main house. She was given a cabin at the very edge of the quarters, so far it nearly touched the tree line. It had been used for storage. The floor was dirt. The fireplace smoked so badly it burned her eyes. There was one small window and a door that never closed properly. She was given a straw mattress. 2 blankets. No work. Orders were clear. Remain inside until after the birth. For 4 months, Martha lived in isolation. Esther brought her food twice a day. Cornbread, buttermilk, sometimes greens, sometimes salt pork if there was extra. They never lingered. Too dangerous. Martha was not allowed to attend prayer. Not allowed to gather on Sundays. She existed in a space between presence and disappearance. She spent long hours alone. She thought of her mother, sold away when Martha was 7. She remembered her voice but not her face. She wondered if her mother had ever stopped looking for her. She thought of the child growing inside her. A child she did not choose but already loved. She pressed her hands to her stomach and whispered promises she did not know how to keep. She thought about running. The woods were close. The river ran north. But she knew the truth. Dogs. Patrols. Chains. Punishment worse than death. On May 3, 1841, the pain began before dawn. Aunt Sarah was sent for. She arrived carrying rags and herbs, her hands steady, her voice calm. She had delivered dozens of babies. She knew what to do. The labor lasted 14 hours. Rain drummed on the roof as Martha screamed into a folded cloth. The cabin was lit by a single candle and the fire. Shadows danced on the walls like watching spirits. When it was over, a baby girl cried into the night. The ledger recorded it the next morning. May 3, 1841. Infant girl born to Martha. House servant. Child healthy. Weight approximately 7 pounds. Father unknown. No one recorded the way Martha wept with relief. Or how she held her daughter to her chest as if the world might steal her if she loosened her grip. She named her Sarah. The name never appeared in ink. For 6 weeks, Martha was allowed to remain in the cabin with her child. 6 weeks of quiet miracles. She learned the sound of Sarah's breathing. The weight of her body against her skin. The shape of her mouth when she slept. She sang softly, songs passed down by women who had lost children before her. For 6 weeks, she was not just property. She was a mother. Then one morning in late June, footsteps stopped outside the cabin. Martha looked through the window and saw William Hargrove standing beside a stranger. The man wore a fine coat despite the heat. He carried a leather satchel heavy with papers. They talked for several minutes. Hargrove gestured. The stranger nodded. He glanced toward the cabin more than once. They were deciding her future while she stood holding her child. Finally, Hargrove knocked. Martha opened the door with Sarah in her arms. "You and the child have been sold," Hargrove said. His voice was calm, almost polite. "You have 30 minutes. The ledger recorded it later that day. June 28, 1841. Sale of Martha age 20 and infant daughter to Hughes Trading Company. Sale price $750. Reason disciplinary reassignment. 30 minutes. Martha wrapped Sarah in the cleanest cloth she had. She gathered her few belongings. A comb. A spare dress. A small wooden cross Esther had slipped into her hand weeks earlier. Outside, Esther and Dinah stood at a distance. They did not approach. Their eyes said everything. "We are sorry. God go with you." Martha climbed into the back of the wagon. As the wheels turned and Riverside disappeared behind her, she did not know this was only the beginning. She did not know her name would be written again. And again. And again. 5 plantations. 5 births. 5 sales. And a system that called it order. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, share it with others, and leave a comment telling us what state you are watching from. Part 3 reveals where Martha and her daughter are taken next and how the pattern tightens its grip. Part 3. By the 3rd plantation, the pattern was no longer hidden. It was precise, predictable, cruel, and it was happening again. Martha sat in the dim cabin at Fairmont Estate, holding her newborn son as dawn crept through the single window. Sarah slept beside her, unaware that her brother's birth had already set something terrible in motion. Martha knew better. She had seen this before. At Riverside, pregnancy had meant isolation. Birth had meant brief mercy. And mercy had been followed by sale. Here at Fairmont, the same machinery was already turning. The ledger would catch up soon. For 6 weeks after Daniel's birth, Martha was allowed to remain in the cabin. Patience helped when she could. Ruth watched Sarah when Martha was too weak to rise. The field work continued without her, but she knew her absence was temporary. Children born to enslaved women were counted like crops. Too many mouths meant loss. Too much scandal meant risk. And scandal was exactly what Daniel represented. Charles Beaumont avoided Martha completely after the birth. When he passed through the quarters, his eyes slid past her cabin as if it did not exist. Edmund Beaumont did not come at all. But silence did not mean forgiveness. It meant calculation. On August 1, 1842, Vernon Hughes returned to Fairmont Estate. Martha knew the sound of his wagon before she saw it. The creak of wood. The heavy steps of horses. Her stomach tightened with dread that felt almost familiar now. Hughes met with Charles Beaumont in the main house. The conversation was short, efficient. 2 men solving a problem. By mid-morning, Hughes stood outside Martha's cabin with papers in hand. Charles Beaumont did not come himself. Martha was told she and her children had been sold. Again, the Fairmont ledger recorded it without emotion. August 1, 1842. Sold 1 female Negro Martha age 21 with 2 children. 1 female approximately 15 months. 1 male approximately 6 weeks. Sale to Hughes Trading Company. Price $900. Reason reduction of household burden. Reduction of burden. Martha had 20 minutes this time. She wrapped Daniel tightly against her chest. Sarah clung to her leg, confused by the urgency, frightened by the raised voices and movement. Patience held Martha's hands for a moment, pressing something small into her palm. A scrap of cloth. A button. Something to remember her by. Ruth could not watch. The wagon pulled away before the sun reached its highest point. This journey lasted longer. Hughes was moving stock across state lines now. Georgia to South Carolina. From tobacco country toward rice plantations along the coast. The air grew heavier. The land flatter. The mosquitoes thicker. At night, Martha lay awake listening to Daniel's breathing, counting Sarah's heartbeats by touch, terrified that one of them might not wake. Hughes sold 2 of the other enslaved people along the way. Each sale happened at the roadside. Quick inspections. Brief negotiations. Human lives exchanged like sacks of grain. Martha and her children were not sold immediately. They were valuable. A woman with proven fertility. 2 healthy children. Literate. Young. By September 1842, the wagon turned toward Cypress Grove Plantation outside Beaufort, South Carolina. Cypress Grove sat low and wide, surrounded by flooded rice fields that shimmered under the sun. The work here was different and deadlier. Standing water bred disease. The mud swallowed feet. The heat pressed down like a weight. The plantation was owned by Colonel Henry Whitlock, a widower in his late 50s with political ambitions and deep connections. He wanted order, discretion, profit. Hughes and Whitlock negotiated on the porch. Martha stood below with her children. The sale price was high. The Cypress Grove Ledger recorded her arrival. September 9, 1842. Purchased female slave Martha, age 21, with 2 children. Literate. Proven breeder. Assigned housework temporarily. That single phrase would follow her everywhere. Proven breeder. At Cypress Grove, Martha was returned to house service. The work was cleaner but the danger was closer. She served meals, cleaned rooms, copied inventory lists under supervision. Her literacy was used constantly. Colonel Whitlock's interest in her began within weeks. He asked her to read letters, draft replies, copy legal documents. Always alone, always after hours. Martha understood now. She did not resist in ways that would get her killed. She resisted by surviving. By the summer of 1843, she was pregnant again. The 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder. Her body was thinner now. Her food rations smaller. Her sleep broken by 2 small children. When the birth came in February 1844, the child was a girl. Small, quiet, fragile. Martha named her Grace. Grace lived only 3 weeks. The ledger noted it in a single line. March 1844. Infant female deceased. Cause unknown. Martha buried her child at the edge of the rice fields at night, with only Sarah and Daniel sleeping beside her. She did not cry loudly. There was no time. 3 months later, she was sold again. Cypress Grove had gotten what it needed. The pattern continued. The 4th plantation was Red Hollow in North Carolina. Cotton again. Then the 5th, Ashland Farm in Virginia. Each place followed the same script. Arrival, assignment, attention, pregnancy, birth, sale. By 1847, Martha was 26 years old. She had given birth 5 times. She had buried 1 child. She had watched 2 others sold away separately when buyers wanted only 1 mouth instead of 3. By the time she reached the 5th plantation, only Sarah remained with her. And even that would not last. It was in that year, 1847, that the courthouse ledger recorded the final entry that would one day stop an intern's hand in mid-scan. Martha, with newborn child, sale pending. That entry would sit unread for over a century. Waiting. If you want to know what happened at the 5th plantation and how this pattern finally ended, make sure you subscribe, share this story, and tell us in the comments what state you are watching from. Part 4 reveals the moment the system nearly broke Martha for good. Part 4. By the 4th plantation, Martha stopped hoping. Hope had become dangerous. It softened her. It made the pain sharper when the pattern repeated. What kept her alive now was something colder and harder. Endurance. She learned to watch without reacting. To listen without speaking. To prepare herself for what she already knew was coming. When Vernon Hughes sold Martha to Red Hollow Plantation in North Carolina in late 1844, the transaction was handled quickly. Red Hollow was a cotton operation struggling to recover from soil exhaustion and poor yields. The owner, Josiah Pruitt, needed labor that could produce immediate value. Martha arrived with only 1 child at her side. Sarah. Daniel had been sold 3 months earlier at Cypress Grove. Hughes had separated them during a roadside transaction. Martha was not told until the wagon was already moving. Daniel was barely a year old. That loss carved something permanent into her. At Red Hollow, Martha was assigned field work again. Cotton rows stretched endlessly under the Carolina sun. The soil was dry and unforgiving. The overseer counted pounds picked each day and punished anyone who fell short. Sarah, now 3 years old, was left with other small children near the edge of the fields. She cried often. Martha learned to keep her eyes forward and her hands moving, even when her chest felt like it was tearing open. Josiah Pruitt noticed Martha within weeks. Not because of her literacy this time. He had no use for reading or writing. He noticed her because she did not break. Others slowed. Others collapsed. Others begged. Martha worked. That kind of endurance drew attention. By the winter of 1845, she was pregnant again. The fourth pregnancy. There was no pretense of privacy at Red Hollow. No isolation cabin. No attempt to hide scandal. Pruitt did not dismiss overseers or pretend ignorance. He did what many planters did quietly and efficiently. He adjusted his expectations. Martha was moved to lighter field tasks. Weeding, carrying water, sorting cotton. She was given slightly more food, not out of kindness, but investment. The child was born in August 1845. Another boy. She named him Isaiah. He lived for 8 weeks. In October, Hughes returned. The Red Hollow Ledger recorded it. October 17, 1845. Sold one female slave Martha age 24 with infant male. Sale price $820. Reason estate liquidity. Sarah was not included in the sale. She was kept. Martha screamed when she realized what that meant. It was the first time she had ever screamed. She clutched Sarah so tightly the child cried in pain. Overseers pulled them apart. Sarah was dragged away, calling for her mother until her voice gave out. Martha was beaten for resisting. Isaiah was sold with her. Sarah disappeared into Red Hollow records. Martha never learned where her daughter went. By the time the wagon pulled away, Martha's body was shaking so badly she could barely hold her newborn son. Something inside her broke completely that day. The fifth plantation awaited. Ashland Farm in Virginia. Ashland was different. It was not a massive operation. It sat on rolling land outside Richmond, worked by fewer than 30 enslaved people. Its owner, Thomas Willoughby, was a lawyer turned planter who believed himself enlightened. He spoke softly. He quoted scripture. He insisted on order and obedience without visible cruelty. Martha arrived in January 1846. Isaiah was 4 months old. The Ashland Ledger described her carefully. Female slave Martha aged 24. Literate. Experienced. With infant. Assigned household duties. Ashland needed clerks. Copyists. Someone to keep accounts while Willoughby traveled to Richmond for court sessions. Martha became indispensable. She copied contracts, logged expenses, read correspondence aloud. Her handwriting appeared in plantation records beside Willoughby's own. This closeness came with its own danger. Willoughby never raised his voice. He never touched her in front of others. He spoke of trust, of gratitude, of responsibility. The violence here was quieter. By the end of 1846, Martha was pregnant for the 5th time. She no longer marked the months. She measured time by births and sales. Isaiah was taken in early 1847. Sold alone. The reason given was practicality. An infant slowed Martha's work. By the summer of 1847, Martha was alone again. Except for what grew inside her. The birth happened in September. A girl. Martha named her Ruth, though she did not expect to keep her long enough for the name to matter. Ashland's ledger recorded the final entry that would one day be discovered in a courthouse basement. October 1847. Martha with newborn child. Sale pending. This time, something went wrong. Willoughby delayed the sale. Weeks passed. Then months. The reason was not mercy. It was fear. Rumors were spreading. Abolitionist pamphlets. Newspaper editorials. Whispers about breeding practices and the sale of women with newborns. Willoughby worried about scrutiny. So he waited. That delay changed everything. In December 1847, Martha did something she had never done before. She spoke. Not loudly. Not in protest. She spoke carefully. To Willoughby's wife. She showed her the records. The repeated births. The repeated sales. The pattern written in ink. She did not accuse. She asked a question. How many children must I bury or lose before this ends? Mrs. Willoughby said nothing, but she read the records. The sale never happened. Martha remained at Ashland. Her name stopped appearing in transfer ledgers. When the Preservation Society intern would one day notice the pattern, it was the sudden stop that raised the most questions. What ended it? That answer was never written down. But Martha lived. Ruth lived. And for the first time in 7 years, the pattern broke. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe, share it, and tell us in the comments what state you are watching from. Part 5 reveals what life looked like after the pattern ended and the cost of surviving it. Part 5. Survival is not the same as freedom. For the first time in 7 years, Martha was not being prepared for sale. No trader arrived. No wagon waited at the drive. No ledger entry followed her name with the words sold or transferred. The pattern had stopped. But stopping did not mean healing. At Ashland Farm, life slowed into something unfamiliar. Still dangerous. Still controlled. But no longer moving at the brutal speed of loss. Martha woke each morning expecting to be told to pack. Expecting footsteps outside her cabin. Expecting Ruth to be taken from her arms the way Sarah, Daniel, and Isaiah had been. The footsteps never came. Weeks turned into months. Ruth grew stronger. She learned the sound of her mother's voice. She smiled. She slept curled against Martha's chest, unaware that her existence had nearly been reduced to a line of ink like the others. Thomas Willoughby never spoke to Martha about the cancelled sale. He acted as though nothing unusual had happened. He continued to bring her papers to copy. Continued to rely on her literacy. Continued to benefit from her presence. But his wife changed. Mrs. Willoughby began watching Martha closely. Not with suspicion, but with discomfort. The ledgers Martha had shown her had done something no sermon ever had. They had made the system visible. Mrs. Willoughby started small. Extra cloth for Ruth. Slightly larger food portions. Permission for Martha to rest longer after childbirth. None of it was kindness in the way freedom would be. It was guilt. At night, Martha lay awake listening to Ruth breathe and thinking about the children who were gone. Sarah would be nearly 7 now. Old enough to work. Old enough to remember fragments of her mother's face. Daniel would be 5. Isaiah nearly 2. She did not know where they were. She did not know if they were alive. Grief became something she carried quietly, like a second spine. Ashland Farm existed on the edge of 2 worlds. Richmond was growing. Newspapers circulated more widely. Debates about slavery grew louder, even as the system dug in its heels. Willoughby sensed the shift. He became cautious. He avoided sales that might draw attention. He spoke often about responsibility and order. Martha remained. Years passed. By 1850, Ruth was 3. Martha had not been pregnant again. Not because the danger had disappeared, but because Mrs. Willoughby quietly intervened. Household arrangements changed. Martha was no longer summoned alone. Duties were shifted. Opportunities for isolation were reduced. No one spoke of it directly. But the violence that had defined Martha's adult life did not repeat. The ledger entries for births ended. So did the entries for sales. Martha aged faster than the years suggested. Her hair thinned early. Lines settled into her face. But she remained upright, alert, observant. Her literacy became a shield. She copied legal notices, wrote inventory lists, handled correspondence when Willoughby was away. Her handwriting appeared in more and more documents. Sometimes she wondered if her words would outlast her. In 1856, something unexpected happened. A visitor arrived from Richmond. A lawyer and abolitionist sympathizer, invited by Willoughby for a legal consultation. The man noticed Martha's writing. Asked where she had learned. Martha answered carefully. From my mother. The man nodded, said nothing more, but later that evening, Mrs. Willoughby came to Martha's cabin. She asked questions, quiet ones, about where Martha had been, about the children she had lost, about the sales. Martha answered without embellishment. She did not beg. She did not accuse. She simply told the truth. 2 years later, Willoughby altered his will. The document did not free Martha. Not fully. The law made that difficult. But it changed Ruth's future. Ruth was to be apprenticed at 16. Trained. Paid wages. Eventually released. It was not justice. But it was interruption. When the Civil War came in 1861, Ashland Farm was drawn into chaos like everything else. Richmond became the capital of the Confederacy. Soldiers passed through. Supplies dwindled. Records were moved. Some were destroyed. Martha protected what she could. She hid papers, wrapped ledgers in cloth, buried some beneath the floor of the office building. She did not know why she did this. Only that the records mattered. When Union troops entered Richmond in 1865, Ashland Farm fell silent. Willoughby fled. Mrs. Willoughby followed. The enslaved people were left waiting. Freedom came slowly, confusingly, without ceremony. A man read an order aloud. You are free. Some cried. Some laughed. Some did not believe him. Martha did not move. She waited until the words were written down. After emancipation, Martha stayed at Ashland for a time. She had nowhere else to go. She worked for wages. She kept records. She raised Ruth. In 1872, she left. She took Ruth north. They settled in Pennsylvania, near a small black community outside Harrisburg. Martha worked as a seamstress. Ruth attended school. Martha never learned what happened to Sarah, Daniel, or Isaiah. She searched quietly, through churches, through freedmen records, through rumors. Nothing. When Martha died in 1889, she was buried under her own name. No ledger marked her death as property loss. More than a century later, Rebecca Chen would pause over a screen in a courthouse basement. She would see the pattern. And for the first time, Martha's life would be read not as transactions, but as testimony. If this story matters to you, make sure to subscribe, share it, and tell us in the comments what state you are watching from. Part 6 reveals what the records did not show and how history almost erased Martha entirely. Part 6. History does not erase people gently. It does it quietly. For every story that survives, 1,000 disappear into dust, fire, and neglect. Martha's life came dangerously close to vanishing entirely. Not because it was unimportant, but because it was inconvenient. After emancipation, no one was required to keep track of her anymore. That was both her freedom and her greatest danger. In the years after the war, Martha lived in Pennsylvania with Ruth, building a life from fragments. She took in sewing. She mended clothes for families who never asked where she came from. Ruth attended school, learned to read openly, learned history that never mentioned her mother. Martha rarely spoke of the past. Not because she had forgotten, but because remembering out loud felt like reopening wounds that never healed properly. Trauma did not leave her in dramatic ways. It settled into her body. She startled at loud footsteps. She woke before dawn even when she did not need to. She kept records of everything. Receipts, letters, names, dates. Paper had once been used against her. Now she trusted nothing without it. Ruth noticed these habits as she grew older. Her mother's need to document. Her refusal to throw anything away. The small box under the bed that Martha never opened in front of anyone. Inside that box were copies. Martha had quietly copied parts of the Ashland ledgers before leaving Virginia. Not full volumes. Just pages. Names. Dates. Transfers. Births. Proof. She did not know why she kept them. Only that some part of her believed the truth might matter someday. Martha died in 1889 during a harsh winter. Pneumonia took her quickly. Ruth was 22. At the funeral, neighbors spoke kindly. They described Martha as quiet, diligent, respectable. No one mentioned slavery. No one mentioned children lost. No one mentioned 5 plantations. Ruth inherited the box. She opened it once. She read the names. Her own name. Her mother's name. The words sold. Transferred. Infant deceased. She closed the box and never opened it again. When Ruth died decades later, the box passed to a niece. Then a cousin. Then into storage. During the Great Depression, it was nearly thrown out. During a move in the 1950s, it was misplaced. During a flood in the 1970s, it was damaged. But somehow, it survived. The courthouse ledgers survived too. They sat in basements and archives. Unread. Unquestioned. Their handwriting praised for neatness. Their content assumed to be dull. Until 2009, Rebecca Chen did not set out to uncover a horror story. She was an intern, 21 years old, tasked with scanning old plantation transfer logs from Richmond County. Her job was to digitize, not interpret. Then she noticed the repetition. The same name, Martha, appearing across different estates, different years, always with the same note. With child, with infant, with newborn. Rebecca cross-referenced the entries. She checked plantation names, sale dates, distances, 5 plantations, 4 states, 7 years. No male enslaved person in the records showed the same pattern. Rebecca brought the issue to her supervisor, then to a historian, then to an ethics review board. What they found unsettled everyone. This was not random cruelty. It was a system that quietly moved a woman from place to place to avoid responsibility while extracting maximum value. Sexual violence was not recorded. But pregnancy was. Children were not named. But their sale prices were. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. The box resurfaced 2 years later. A local genealogist researching freed black families in Pennsylvania contacted the Preservation Society. She had found copied plantation records among family effects. Records that matched the courthouse ledgers. Martha's handwriting appeared on some of them. She had copied her own captivity. For the first time, Martha existed in 2 places at once. As property in official records and as a thinking witness in her own hand. Historians debated how to present the story. Some argued it was too disturbing. Too speculative. That without written testimony of assault, conclusions should be cautious. Others argued the math was testimony enough. The final report did not soften the truth. It described a reproductive trafficking pattern within legal slavery. A woman repeatedly sold after childbirth. Children separated strategically. Ownership shifted to avoid scandal. Martha became a case study. A name that could no longer be ignored. Her story was presented at conferences, published in journals, discussed in classrooms. But something was missing. Emotion. Records could explain what happened. They could not explain how it felt to lose a child 5 times. To have your body turned into an investment strategy. That part was left to imagination. Which is where stories come in. Martha's life was never meant to be read. The men who recorded her existence assumed permanence. They believed power made them invisible. They were wrong. Ink outlasts silence. And silence, eventually, invites questions. Rebecca Chen would later say that Martha's ledger entries changed how she viewed history. Not as distant facts, but as lives compressed into margins. 1 woman, 5 plantations, 7 years, and a system that depended on no one looking too closely. If this story matters to you, make sure to subscribe, share it, and tell us in the comments what state you are watching from. Part 7 explores what happened to Martha's lost children and whether the records ever whispered their fate. Part 7. Some questions refuse to stay buried. You can lock them in archives. You can hide them in footnotes. You can cover them with polite language and academic caution. But certain questions keep breathing. The most dangerous question in Martha's story was not what happened to her. It was what happened to her children. The records named them only briefly. Infant, newborn, child under 2, sold with mother, sold separately, no names, no graves, no endings. When historians finished documenting Martha's movements, attention turned to the gaps she left behind. 5 births, 5 separations, 5 lives that vanished into the machinery of slavery. Finding them was never going to be easy. Slavery destroyed paper trails on purpose. Children were renamed, ages altered, family ties erased to increase control. And after emancipation, millions of people started again with nothing but memory. Still, researchers tried. They followed sale records forward instead of backward. They looked at the plantations where Martha gave birth and tracked all children sold within 12 months of those dates. Patterns began to appear. On the first plantation in Virginia, a baby girl was sold 3 weeks after Martha was transferred. No mother listed. Price unusually high for an infant. On the second plantation in North Carolina, a male child aged 1 was sold to a neighboring county. The seller had no record of a pregnant enslaved woman that year except Martha. On the third plantation in Georgia, there was nothing. A gap. A missing page. Water damage had erased the entry entirely. Silence can be its own answer. The fourth plantation in Alabama showed something different. A child was listed as retained. Not sold. No gender noted. No age. Just a mark indicating property held. That plantation burned in 1864. The fifth record ended in Mississippi, months before emancipation. A baby sold to a man whose name never appeared again in any census. The trail scattered like ash. Researchers debated how far to go. Some argued it was impossible. Others believed even partial recovery mattered. One historian said something that shifted the entire project. We look for certainty because uncertainty feels like failure. But for enslaved families, uncertainty was the condition of life. They stopped searching for full answers and started looking for fragments. Church baptism records, Freedmen Bureau notes, black cemetery logs, oral histories passed down without dates. And slowly, faint connections emerged. In North Carolina, a woman named Eliza Turner applied for a pension in 1912. She stated she was born enslaved around 1856 and separated from her mother before she could remember her face. Her mother's name was Martha. In Alabama, a formerly enslaved man named Isaac gave an interview in the 1930s. He spoke of being raised by an older woman who was not his mother. He remembered her crying at night and whispering names. One of those names was Ruth, Martha's daughter. In Pennsylvania, Ruth's descendants recalled family stories about siblings who never came north. Children who existed only in silence. These were not confirmations. They were echoes. But history is built from echoes. The findings were presented carefully. No definitive claims. Only possibilities supported by overlapping timelines, locations, and testimonies. Some critics pushed back. They said the evidence was emotional. Incomplete. Not rigorous enough. But the truth is, slavery was designed to leave incomplete evidence. Demanding perfect proof from broken systems is another way of denying harm. What haunted researchers most was not what they found. It was what they did not. No records of reunions. No letters between siblings. No confirmation that any of Martha's children ever knew her name. She lived long enough to see emancipation. They may not have. Even if they survived, freedom did not mean safety. Disease, poverty, violence, Children freed without families were often absorbed into other households or labor systems. Freedom came without instructions. Martha never wrote about her children directly. But in her copied ledgers, there were small marks historians initially overlooked. Tiny dots next to certain entries. Light pressure marks. Almost invisible. When magnified, they appeared intentional. One dot for each birth. A private counting system. She was marking what the official records refused to honor. That discovery changed how her story was taught. No longer just a case study. Not just a pattern of abuse. But a mother resisting erasure in the only way she could. By remembering. By counting. By refusing to let the record be complete without her presence. Part 7 ends not with answers, but with responsibility. Because once we know that these children existed, we inherit the obligation to speak their absence. To say that history is not only what happened, but what was taken and never returned. In Part 8, the story moves forward to the present. To how descendants wrestle with inherited silence and what it means to carry a past that was never allowed to explain itself. If this story moved you, please subscribe, share it with others, and leave a comment below. Your engagement helps keep stories like Martha's from disappearing again. Part 8. Some stories do not end when the suffering stops. They end when someone finally listens. More than a century after Martha's last recorded entry, her name surfaced again in a place she could never have imagined. A quiet university archive. A climate-controlled room. A digital scanner humming softly like a heartbeat. Her life, once reduced to ledger ink and sale prices, was being read by people who lived in freedom but carried questions of their own. One of them was a woman named Claire Whitman. Claire was not looking for Martha. She was looking for herself. Claire had grown up knowing little about her family beyond her grandmother. There were gaps in every story. Long pauses. Changed subjects. When she asked about older generations, the answer was always the same. We do not know. Or sometimes. It is complicated. Claire was a graduate student researching enslaved women and forced reproduction. She spent her days reading plantation records that made her stomach turn. Numbers replacing names. Births logged like inventory. Children priced like tools. Late one evening, she came across Martha's file. It was thicker than most. Multiple plantations. Repeated pregnancies. Disciplinary transfers. A pattern so clear it felt deliberate. Claire felt something she could not explain. A pull. A pressure behind the eyes. She printed the file and took it home. That night, she dreamed of a woman standing at the edge of a forest, holding a baby wrapped in cloth. The woman never spoke. She only looked at Claire, as if asking something. Claire woke with her heart racing. She told herself it was imagination. Stress. Empathy overload. But the dreams continued. Sometimes it was a wagon moving away in silence. Sometimes it was a cabin door closing. Sometimes it was just counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Claire began to trace Martha's timeline more deeply. Not just the facts, but the spaces between them. She noticed something strange. Every time Martha was sold, the new plantation was closer to known escape routes. Rivers, forests, Quaker settlements, free black communities. This did not match the idea of punishment transfers meant to isolate. It looked like movement towards something. Or someone. Claire brought this up to her advisor. He dismissed it as coincidence. Slave traders followed markets, not morality. But Claire could not shake the feeling that Martha had been making choices. Small ones. Dangerous ones. Choices that did not survive in official records. Claire started searching genealogical databases. Census records. Freedmen Bureau claims. Pension applications. Then she found it. A family tree uploaded by a user in Ohio. The earliest glimpse showed a woman named Ruth who listed her mother as Martha. Born enslaved. Location uncertain. Claire messaged the account owner. The reply came 2 days later. My great-great-grandmother always said her mother was sold many times. She said her mother counted her children so they would not be forgotten. Claire felt her hands shake. The horror of slavery is often shown in whips and chains. But there is another horror. The horror of forgetting, of names dissolving, of children growing old without knowing where they came from. Claire traveled to Ohio. The family welcomed her cautiously. They had been contacted before by people chasing theories. But Claire was different. She brought documents, dates, copies of ledgers. They brought stories. One story had been passed down through generations. About a woman who told her daughter never to forget how many she was. You are the fourth, the woman said. Remember the others. The room fell silent. Claire realized then that history was not only hiding in archives. It was living in people. Bent, scarred, still breathing. That night, Claire dreamed again. This time, the woman smiled. Not because the pain was gone, but because it had been seen. Part 8 is not about closure. It is about inheritance. The trauma of slavery did not end with emancipation. It traveled through bloodlines, through silence, through fear of asking questions that might hurt too much. But so did strength. So did memory. So did the refusal to disappear. Martha did not leave a diary. She did not sign a declaration. She did not escape north with her children. But she resisted in the ways available to her. By surviving, by loving, by counting. In the next part, Part 9, the story confronts the hardest truth of all. What it means to carry a legacy built from pain and how the past still shapes justice today. If this story matters to you, please subscribe, share it with others, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps keep these voices alive. Part 9. Some ghosts do not haunt houses. They haunt bloodlines. They live in habits, fears, silences, and questions that never quite get answered. They pass from parent to child without a sound, shaping lives long after the original suffering is gone. Martha was one of those ghosts. Not because she wanted to be remembered, but because the world never allowed her to be forgotten. Claire returned home after her visit to Ohio with a heavy mind. She had confirmed what she already felt in her bones. Martha was real. Her children were real. Her suffering was not just history. It was inheritance. But now came the hardest part. What do you do with the truth once you find it? Claire's research began to take a new shape. It was no longer only about the past. It was about the present. About how lives today were still shaped by decisions made in ledger books nearly 200 years ago. She began speaking publicly, first in classrooms, then in small community halls. She told Martha's story carefully, respectfully, never as entertainment, but as evidence. Evidence that slavery was not just labor theft. It was family theft, identity theft, generational theft. Some people listened quietly, their faces tight with emotion. Others crossed their arms. That was a long time ago, they said. Why dig it up? Why make people feel guilty for something they did not do? Claire learned quickly that history frightens people most when it refuses to stay buried. At one lecture, a man stood up and asked a question that was really an accusation. Are you saying people today owe something for this? The room went silent. Claire paused before answering. No, she said calmly. I am saying people today are living with something that began here. You cannot heal a wound you refuse to name. After the lecture, a young woman approached Claire in tears. She said her grandmother had been afraid of hospitals. Afraid of doctors. Afraid of authority. No one ever knew why. Now she wondered. That was the true horror of Martha's story. Not only what happened to her, but how the system trained pain into generations. Children raised by traumatized parents learn survival before joy. Silence before trust. Obedience before safety. Martha's life had been shaped by forced choices. Her children grew up watching their mother disappear into herself to survive. They learned early that love was dangerous because it could be taken away. That lesson did not end with slavery. It echoed into freedom. Claire uncovered records showing that after emancipation, Martha's surviving children never settled in one place for long. They moved constantly, Georgia to Alabama, Alabama to Tennessee, Tennessee to Ohio, always moving, always cautious, always counting their children. The fear of being claimed again did not vanish when the chains were removed. It simply changed shape. Part 9 is where the story turns uncomfortable. Because it asks something of the listener. It asks you to see how systems outlive laws. How cruelty embeds itself into normal routines. How injustice does not need to announce itself loudly to remain powerful. The horror is not just what Edmund Beaumont did. It is how many men like him were protected by silence. The horror is not just the children Martha lost. It is how easily their loss became paperwork. The horror is not just the past. It is the present shaped by it. Claire eventually helped organize a memorial project. Not a statue. Not a grand monument. Just names. Names read aloud once a year. Names pulled from ledgers. Names that had only ever been written down when someone was bought or sold. Martha's name was read. So were her children's. For the first time in recorded history, their names were spoken without a price attached. People cried. Some felt anger. Some felt relief. This was not about blame. It was about acknowledgement. Because horror thrives in denial. And healing begins with truth. In the final part, Part 10, the story comes full circle. Not with justice as we wish it had happened, but with justice as it can still exist today. Memory, witness, and the refusal to let silence win again. If this story moved you, please subscribe, share it with others, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps keep these stories alive and remembered. Part 10 Final part. History is not always written by those who lived it. Sometimes it is written by those who survived it, by those who inherited its shadows, by the ones brave enough to look at the ledger pages, the faded ink, the numbers that stood in place of names, the transactions that turned mothers into property and children into currency. This is where Martha's story comes to its final chapter. After decades of research, tracing, and listening to stories passed down through generations, historians had pieced together a narrative that felt whole, even though so much was still lost. Martha had survived. Her spirit endured in her children, even if she could not always protect them. Her resilience had carried forward, quietly resisting erasure. Her children, scattered across states, had built lives under the weight of fear, of absence, and of secrets they were never supposed to question. And yet, there was something remarkable in that endurance. Something that could not be bought, sold, or numbered. Something that no ledger could ever fully capture. Claire Whitman, the researcher who had spent years unraveling the traces of Martha's life, understood this better than anyone. She had seen the tears in Ohio, heard the whispers of family stories, touched the documents that recorded lives in cold ink but could not erase humanity. She knew that the power of Martha's story was not in shock or horror. It was in witness. It was in memory. By the end of the Civil War, Martha was in her late 30s. She had lost at least 3 children to sales, survived harsh work, abuse, and pregnancies forced upon her, and yet she remained unbroken in ways that could not be counted. She was illiterate once more because she had been forbidden to read after being sold repeatedly, but she taught her surviving children the value of counting, of remembering, of knowing who they were and who came before them. The ledgers ended their cold record with the last known sale in Mississippi. But Martha's life did not end there. She walked north in the uncertain years after emancipation, quietly seeking relatives, seeking refuge, seeking a life that was denied for so long. Her children grew up hearing fragments of stories. A mother's voice in whispers. Names carefully spoken. Warnings carefully given. Lessons of survival, of love, of resistance. Some of Martha's children moved west. Some stayed near the places they had been enslaved. Some disappeared into urban centers where records could not reach them. But each carried a piece of Martha with them. Each carried her lessons. Each carried the silent tally of what she had endured. This final part of her story is not about vengeance. It is not about punishment for those who caused harm. It is about recognition, preservation, and the inheritance of dignity. In small towns, descendants now gather to speak her name. In family reunions, elders whisper the history of a mother who counted, who resisted, who loved under impossible circumstances. Local historians mark cemeteries where enslaved families are buried, often in unmarked graves, with simple plaques honoring the lives erased by time and cruelty. Martha's legacy is a reminder that horror does not always end with a ledger's last page. The effects of cruelty ripple through decades. But so does courage, so does memory, so does the quiet, steadfast refusal to be forgotten. In modern archives, digital maps now trace Martha's movement across 5 plantations, showing each birth, each forced relocation, each loss. Educators use her story to teach the human cost behind slavery's economic efficiency. Museum exhibits honor her name. Documentary filmmakers tell her story not to shock, but to illuminate the resilience of those who survived. Claire Whitman continues her work, connecting living descendants with the fragments of their history. She records oral histories. She publishes articles. She speaks at universities. And she teaches one important truth. That history is not just about events. It is about people. It is about the unseen lives. It is about acknowledging what was taken and celebrating what survived. Martha's story ends where it began, in numbers, but transforms those numbers into humanity. 5 plantations, 5 births, 5 separations, 7 years of relentless cruelty. And yet, one woman's courage echoes across centuries. We may never know the full fate of all her children. We may never know the faces she never saw again. But we can honor what remains. The act of remembering itself becomes resistance. This final chapter is about connection. About listening. About the responsibility we inherit when we uncover the past. To speak names. To tell stories. To make sure that even when justice cannot be served, recognition can be given. Martha's voice speaks to us through what was left behind. Through the ink on ledgers. Through family stories, through the counting she did quietly so her children would survive the system. Her story challenges us to see the cost of silence, the cost of dehumanization, and the power of witnessing. Her story demands that we do not look away. If this story moved you, make sure you subscribe to our channel. Share it with others who need to hear it. And leave a comment below to tell us what part of Martha's journey struck you most. Her story survives because we remember. Remember. Speak. Witness.